All right, time to dive right in, folks. Today we're taking you to New Zealand, sifting through the latest from NZ Lanka News, and let me tell you, it's a real mixed bag this time around.
It really is. We've got everything from economic updates and policy changes to a dash of cultural history and even a celestial event.
It's kind of like looking through a kaleidoscope, all these different pieces coming together to create this picture of New Zealand.
What's interesting is how this collection of news, as diverse as it is, really highlights the sense of New Zealand at a crossroads, facing challenges, grappling with opportunities across so many different sectors.
Yeah, like the whole country's going through a bit of a growing pains phase. And speaking of growing pains, one story that really jumped out, especially for our listeners with ties to Sri Lanka, is about the Meningo twins.
Oh, absolutely. Their journey is unfortunately not unique.
Both qualified nurses, ready to contribute, but navigating the system to work in New Zealand has been, well,
It lays bare this global issue, a real disparity between the demand for skilled professionals
wow.
and the often really complicated immigration and licensing processes that are meant to, I don't know, I guess,
Yeah.
regulate that flow of talent.
It's almost ironic, isn't it? New Zealand needs healthcare professionals, actively seeking them out, and yet here you have these qualified individuals, the Meningo twins, facing roadblock after roadblock.
And it's frustrating, right? Both for the individuals and for countries like New Zealand grappling with these critical shortages. It
Yeah.
makes you wonder, how efficient are these systems really?
It's a good reminder that behind all these headlines, these policy debates, there are real people with real lives and dreams and aspirations trying to build a future.
It's about recognizing the human side of these policies and finding ways to streamline these processes, absolutely, but also thinking about the support systems that help skilled migrants not just work, but actually thrive in their new home.
Absolutely. So from a story about real people to, well, the story of how a whole country got its nickname. Remember that age-old question about Kiwis? It turns out it's got a pretty fascinating connection to rugby. Any rugby fans out there will get a kick out of this one and maybe learn something new along the way.
It's one of those quirky historical tidbits that just makes you smile, I mean, who would have thought that this little flightless bird, steeped in Maori legend, would become a symbol of New Zealand on the battlefield during World War One?
A shoe polish. Don't forget the shoe polish. Apparently it's got something to do with shoe polish.
Right. And then, of course, there's the connection to the All Blacks, New Zealand's national rugby team. It's amazing how these seemingly random threads, culture, history, even shoe polish, can weave together to shape a nation's identity.
It's all connected. But speaking of national identity, let's bring it back to the here and now.
Yeah.
The big news on everyone's mind in New Zealand right now, inflation is finally down. Good news, right?
Well, on the surface, absolutely. Hitting the Reserve Bank's target range for inflation is definitely a positive sign, especially after those record highs we saw last year. But like with most things in economics, it's not always that straightforward.
Because while lower inflation sounds great on paper, it doesn't necessarily mean everyone's suddenly feeling financially secure.
Exactly. If you dig a little deeper into the numbers, you start to see a different picture emerging.
Because, let's be honest, none of us are just living in the world of economic statistics. We're living in the real world with real bills to pay.
And for many Kiwis, those rising rents, the ones that were a major contributor to inflation in the first place, those haven't magically disappeared just because overall inflation is down.
In fact, for some, it might even feel like they're feeling the pinch even more now.
It's a good reminder that we need to look beyond those big economic headlines and consider the real-life impacts on everyday people.
Lower inflation might be a win for the Reserve Bank, but does it resonate with someone who's struggling to make rent each month? I'm not so sure.
It really raises the question, what good is a statistical victory if it doesn't translate into a tangible improvement in people's lives?
And that's why those concerns about slow job growth raised by the opposition parties are especially relevant. It's like, okay, inflation might be down, but are there enough jobs out there for people to actually feel the benefit?
Right, because a strong economy needs both.
Speaking of things needing a good balance, let's try to untangle this news about the government's decision to tighten the migrant exploitation protection work visa. Seems like they're trying to fix a problem, but might be creating a whole new set of issues.
Yeah, definitely a hot button issue.
What's the general consensus?
It's a bit divided, to say the least. I mean, the government's stance is that these changes to the visa are crucial to prevent exploitation. They say it's about safeguarding the integrity of the visa system, making sure it's not being abused, which on the surface sounds reasonable enough.
Sure, sure.
But critics, and you're seeing this particularly from the Labor and Green parties, they're arguing that it could actually end up making migrants more vulnerable.
More vulnerable.
Hmm.
How so?
Well, the concern is that by narrowing the criteria for these visas, and especially by removing that option for a second visa, it kind of backs migrants into a corner. They might feel pressured to accept work situations that are risky or even dangerous, simply out of desperation. They don't have any other options.
So it's that classic dilemma, isn't it? Trying to protect people, but potentially pushing them into even riskier situations because the safety net is gone.
It's a tough tightrope to walk, that's for sure. And this is something that resonates far beyond New Zealand's borders. It speaks to a larger global challenge. How do countries balance their own economic needs, their need for workers, with the ethical imperative to protect the rights and well-being of migrants? Especially when those migrants are often essential to filling critical workforce gaps.
It's about finding that sweet spot where everyone benefits, which is way easier said than done, especially when you have different political agendas at play.
Absolutely. And on the topic of essential workers, this visa change could have a real ripple effect on healthcare.
Oh, right. Because we were just talking about the challenges faced by internationally qualified nurses, like the Meningo twins. This just adds another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation.
Exactly. We've already got a shortage of healthcare professionals in New Zealand. We've heard about qualified nurses struggling to find jobs, even with the existing demand. This new visa policy, it's like adding fuel to the fire.
It feels like we keep bumping up against these unintended consequences. You try to fix one thing, and it creates a domino effect, impacting something else entirely.
It really underlines the need for a more holistic approach to policymaking, one that considers all angles, all potential consequences. Because the reality is these issues are interconnected, whether it's immigration or healthcare or the economy. You can't just address them in isolation.
It's about systems thinking.
Right. Exactly.
Well, speaking of systems that feel a little broken, let's shift gears and talk about this pilot shortage that's hitting New Zealand. It seems like something that's been simmering in the background for a while, but now it's really starting to impact travel.
Yeah, it's no longer just an industry issue. This is something that's impacting everyday travelers, and it has the potential to get even worse.
So what's the root of the problem? Why are there suddenly not enough pilots?
Well, there's no single answer, unfortunately. It's a confluence of factors. For one, the rising cost of pilot training programs is a major barrier to entry for a lot of young people who might be interested in aviation. Those programs are expensive.
Yeah, not exactly pocket change.
Then you've got increased competition from other countries who are also vying for experienced pilots, better pay, better benefits. And let's not forget the lingering impact of the pandemic, which hit the aviation industry incredibly hard. Airlines were grounding flights, laying off staff, and a lot of pilots decided to retire early or pursue different career paths.
A perfect storm, so to speak. So what's the solution?
Well, there are a lot of ideas being thrown around, but no easy answers. Some are calling for government intervention, increased funding for pilot training programs to make them more accessible, for example. Others are suggesting easing immigration rules to attract qualified pilots from overseas.
Makes sense. But in the meantime, travelers might have to buckle up for a bumpy ride, both literally and figuratively. Delays, cancellations, higher airfares. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
Absolutely. It's a turbulent time for aviation.
Turbulent is a good word for it. Speaking of turbulence, it's not just the skies, right? Let's touch down from the pilot shortage and land right back here on terra firma with a closer look at the New Zealand police. They're doing some restructuring, trying to adapt to the times, I guess.
It's a sign of the times, isn't it? They're putting a lot of focus on cybercrime, online safety, that sort of thing, which makes sense considering how much of our lives are online these days.
Totally. But it seems like a tough balancing act. On one hand, we're hearing about streamlining, cutting back in certain areas to free up resources, but then on the other hand, don't you need more resources to combat something as complex as cybercrime?
Well, that's the thing about change. Sometimes you have to reevaluate how you're using your resources, make sure they're aligned with the current priorities. And for the New Zealand police, that seems to be shifting towards the digital realm.
So Less about pounding the pavement, more about, what, keyboard warriors now?
In a way, yes. And this new legislation that aligns New Zealand with the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime is a pretty clear signal that they're taking this seriously. It's about creating a framework for international cooperation. Things like sharing information, preserving digital evidence. It's a whole new world of policing.
Makes sense. You've got to stay one step ahead of the bad guys, right?
Yeah.
But speaking of things that could use some streamlining, let's not forget about those infamous driver's license backlogs. Anyone who's tried to navigate that system knows it can be a bit of a nightmare.
Absolutely. Those long wait times for tests, it's been a real pain point. For new arrivals, teenagers, everyone.
It's like a rite of passage, but with extra paperwork.
Right. But it sounds like they're finally trying to tackle those backlogs.
About time, right? So what's the plan?
Well, they're trying a few things. Extending the validity of overseas licenses so people don't have to rush into the system as soon as they arrive. Hiring more testing officers to increase capacity for those tests. There's even talk about introducing mandatory wait times between tests.
To keep people from just retaking it over and over until they pass.
Exactly. It's about making the system more efficient, fairer for everyone involved.
Okay, so from cybercrime to driver's licenses, it sounds like New Zealand's got a lot on its plate.
Yeah.
But hey, at least there's that supermoon to look forward to, right?
Right. A little celestial wonder to remind us there's a bigger picture out there.
Exactly. It's all about perspective. Well, on that note, we're going to have to wrap things up. But to all our listeners out there, keep your eyes in the skies, stay informed about what's happening here on the ground, and most importantly, never stop questioning and exploring the world around you. This has been The Deep Dive, signing off for today.